Hi, my name is Jonathan Roth. I'm joined by Dr. George Friedman from Austin, Texas. George, thank you so much for joining me. I want to talk to you about another thing that happened in history, something that relates to a trip that you're taking here very soon. You're heading to Poland. We all know that on September the 1st, 1939, both Germany and Russia invaded Poland in a secret deal to split up the country, and ever since, it's related to many of the problems we have even today. Now, I want to take a story that came out of that whole thing, and that was something that happened in 1941 when the Germans double-crossed the Russians and began Operation Barbarossa. To this day, that's maybe one of the biggest double crosses we've ever seen in at least in modern warfare. Why don't you give me some of the backstory about what happened there?
Well, the Russians knew they weren't ready for war. One of the reasons the Soviets had killed most of the senior commanders they had. So they were looking to buy time. And the deal with Germany allowed them to take eastern Poland, get more depth, and they thought buy all the time they needed. It wasn't that they weren't expecting a double cross. In fact, it wasn't that they weren't planning their own double cross. It was just they weren't expecting it at that time. And one of the reasons that they didn't expect it was that German intelligence really fooled them. It just fed them all sorts of information indicating that there was no attack coming, that in spite of the fact that several million German troops were lined up to attack, Stalin didn't believe it. Stalin was getting this great intelligence that was being fed to them by the Germans, by a guy called Heydrich, who was heading up the Nazis' intelligence service. And so he didn't believe it. And when the attack came, he was completely unprepared. One, because he didn't expect it to come, and two, because he thought he had more time. He had time to prepare, and he didn't. And so they threw him back.
Interesting. Okay, look, there's been so many articles, textbooks, you could name the volume of encyclopedias that have been written on what happened there with this double cross. But many people have looked at it from Germany's perspective and asked themselves, why would Germany put themselves out there into a two-front war that frankly would have been impossible to win? Was it just because, as you say, it wasn't like Russia wasn't planning their own double cross at some point in the future?
Hitler knew there was going to be war with Russia. The question was when. They were in a good position in that the United States was not in the war yet, and Britain was isolated and had been defeated in France. So for the moment, if there was going to be a war with Russia, it was going to be a single front war. And being a single front war, they thought they could win. The problem with the invasion was that Hitler could not decide what he was after. Instead of massing all of his forces in one direction or another, he sent one massive army south through Ukraine, another army group north to Leningrad, and another one toward Moscow. It almost took Moscow, but it didn't have the force. If he had decided to attack either south toward the oil fields of Baku, or directly only toward Moscow, he probably would have won the war. But for some reason, he thought that he was in such a powerful position that he would be able to attack in all directions. So in the end, the Soviets had the last laugh. They were fooled, but Hitler fooled himself.
Okay, so could a double cross, like what happened between the Germans and the Russians, do you think that sort of thing is possible in today's world, the way intelligence works today?
Well, I have no idea why this world is different from the world that's existed for 5,000 years, but nations and human beings double-cross each other all the time. They give their word, they shake hands, they appear honest, and then they do something totally duplicitous. So you're asking me, has duplicity been abolished? Certainly not by the internet. There's plenty of duplicity there. And certainly not between nations. I mean, there has been double crosses of various sorts. I don't think that the Russian invasion of Georgia was not without its duplicity. And I'm sure that the U.S. operation in Iraq and Afghanistan had its share of duplicity. Few nations don't engage in it, and they're the weak ones.
So I would assume, though, that based on, in an age of satellites, massing, tens of hundreds of thousands of troops on anyone's borders these days, it's pretty difficult to hide that.
Oh yeah, Stalin knew about the massing of forces. He just misinterpreted it. I'm reminded of a war in 1973 between the Arabs and Israel, when the Egyptians massed about 1 million troops on the other side of the Suez Canal, and Israeli intelligence saw them, knew they were there, and convinced themselves it was a training exercise. So the real problem of intelligence is frequently not that they don't have the information, not even that they don't understand it, but the recipients frequently lie to themselves about it. They kid themselves about what's going on because they don't want to contemplate what might actually be happening. And this is why, and I'm biased here, intelligence analysis is at least as important as intelligence gathering. All the intelligence gathering in the world gave gave Stalin an absolutely clear picture of what was going on. It was the failure of intelligence analysis to figure it out.
So you're heading to Poland here very soon. This is a region where Operation Barbarossa still reverberates to this day. Why don't you walk me through what some of those ways are?
Well, remember that starting in 1939, when they were divided by the Germans and the Soviets, until 1991, Poland was occupied. It was not sovereign. Under the Germans, it suffered terribly in terms of the intentions, which was to render Poland an illiterate population, and also under the harsh and genocidal rules they operated under. It was Jews they killed, but others as well. I mean, this was terrible. When the Soviets were involved, they took all the senior officers from the Polish army and shot them, all the officers, at a place called Katyn Forest. Afterwards, there were mass arrests and took many Poles to Siberia. And when the Poles rose up in Warsaw, the Soviets wouldn't come. So here were the Poles caught between the Germans, caught between the Russians, aware that either one of them could annihilate them. So they're living on the edge constantly. So others, can be very calm about what the Russians do. Others can be very calm about what the Germans do. The Poles can't afford being calm. And whenever you go there, as much as the situation has changed, the fear of double cross, another one, is always there.
Well, Dr. Friedman, thank you so much for your time and insights.
Thank you.